of AI. So today we have a very important topic that is often overlooked, but one of a really important aspect of artificial intelligence, which is the human and environment cost of the AI race. As the global AI as the global world, as every country today is racing forward to build more and more AI technologies, we must pause and think at what cost. From exploitative labor practices and massive energy consumptions of AI models, this race comes with real world consequences that we often overlook. And these consequences require our urgent attention today. To guide us through this important discussion, we have with us Donna Matthew, who is a researcher at Digital Future Labs. Please join me in welcoming Donna Matthew. Donna has a background in law with experience in public policy research and legislative drafting. At Digital Future Labs, her work focuses on the ethical dimensions of data and artificial intelligence, particularly in Asia's climate action strategies and in access to justice in India. She has been part of Digital Future Lab's flagship research AI and climate futures in Asia with the Rockefeller Foundation. Since 2024, she has been leading research and coordinating efforts for Code Green, a media series that explores contemporary themes in AI and climate. Welcome, Donna, and over to you.
Thanks so much, Angela, for the thoughtful introduction. And also thank you to SFLC for the invitation and for running this amazing series over the course of this week, looking at important topics. Super excited to be here and also hear questions from participants. Okay, my screen is visible. I will get started. Before we jump into the theme of today's presentation, I would like to just provide a brief overview of Digital Futures Lab. I'm not sure if my screen is entirely visible right now.
It is. It is visible.
It is? Okay, amazing. So Digital Futures Lab is an interdisciplinary research and advisory firm that studies the intersection of tech and society in the global south with a focus on India. And we use foresight methodologies, evidence-based research, and public engagement to work towards realizing equitable, safe, and sustainable digital futures. Some of our work, our ongoing research, is on open source AI and the tensions and challenges in that space, capacity strengthening in the context of responsible AI principles, gender biases in large language models in the Indian context, and climate and AI. And today's presentation, as we go in the next 25 minutes, I'll focus on climate and AI and some of our learnings from this strand of our work. And before we also start, I just want to give a caveat that my presentation today is not about regulations or law as such, but kind of talking about the more systemic impacts of the adoption of AI for different interventions in different domains, with a focus on climate. So our team today is focusing on the materiality of AI supply chains. And by materiality, I mean the kind of physical materials, and in this context, also social factors that are necessary for the design, production, as well as deployment of AI. And we'll kind of look at the environmental costs, the energy consumption, water consumption, carbon footprint of AI, the resource extractivism that comes along with AI infrastructures, and then perhaps dwell a little on resolving these tensions between AI's potential promises and its negative human and environmental impacts. So why is looking at AI's materiality important in our present times? We tend to have this kind of imagination that's driven by narratives, be it from tech companies, from governments, about AI being in this cloud, about data being stored in a cloud, which does not let us imagine it as like a physical infrastructure. However, the current AI development trajectories that we have with its own set of environmental harms and costs, they're premised on promises of future breakthroughs in AI. Right? There's a lot of promise that AI could help in resolving development challenges. You'll also see in a region like Asia, governments driving AI adoption. And what that leads to is more investment in energy sources, be it in renewable energy or continued dependence on fossil fuels. This AI also keeping those demands alive, and then more physical infrastructures for AI. And these physical infrastructures in themselves are quite resource intensive. You might need coal to run those data centers. You'll need metals for a data center, for a data server. So it is quite resource intensive, not just for materials, but also in terms of capital. So you need a lot of financial resources to keep these structures moving. So we'll start off today with the kind of focus on climate and AI that Digital Futures Lab kickstarted its research in 2023, as Angela mentioned, with the Rockefeller Foundation. And what we did there was try to examine the kind of use cases that AI has in Asia, in particular. Look at the opportunities, but also the challenges, the ethical challenges and risks in adopting AI for climate action. And just to give you a flavor of the kind of use cases that are already out there. Of course, it's at a very nascent stage. We saw a lot of pilots and a lot of studies in research and development, but we're seeing improvements in weather forecasting from historical and current data sets. We're seeing companies like Google's DeepMind using AI to discover new materials that can be used for battery storage, etc. We're seeing AI being used to optimize high emission industries like cement, etc. So decarbonize those sectors. And then also for biodiversity conservation, being able to predict fires, help identify species and conserve their habitats. And I'll use two examples here to kind of also show the breadth of these use cases. And this example, the first one is from Kenya, where there was a proposal to build a nuclear reactor in Kenya in a marine wildlife reserve, but there was not enough information on undersea creatures, species in the region. So researcher developed identify and count undersea species, and then to kind of extrapolate from that and think of the impact of those of that nuclear reactor for that region, which then prompted the government to do an environmental impact assessment for that particular project. The other use case is on an extreme end where AI is being used to optimize the oil and gas industry, right? To find oil reservoirs, to improve drilling, for predictive maintenance of drill sites, etc., which is problematic because we are trying to wean, like humanity in general is trying to wean away from fossil fuels, but then AI and tech companies are using AI in particular to help optimize oil and gas industries. So there are some tensions in this space, right? And the first is around the tension of AI being used for subverting, in some sense, net zero commitments. And perhaps a solution there is that the AI is not used for those things. But then, as the theme for today is where we're looking at the environmental impacts of AI, we'll focus on two aspects: the increasing evidence on AI as environmental cause, and how these AI technologies need minerals and metals for their computing infrastructure. So we'll start off with AI and environmental impacts. We're being, I mean, I think on a daily basis now in the last couple of months, we do see a lot of attention grabbing headlines around data centers consuming this much energy, ChatGPT is using this much water. So IEA had put out some estimates recently that said that by 2026, data centers will consume as much electricity as a country like Japan. And we also had some estimates that said that about 5 to 50 prompts on ChatGPT generating those responses uses about 500 milliliters of water. What does this really mean? Like, where is data center coming into in a conversation in AI? So AI essentially runs on data centers, but there are also other things that are run in a data center. Like the data center powers your e-commerce platforms. It powers anything that uses data storage, be it a meeting platform, a Zoom meeting platform, where there is some cloud backup, cloud storage. You need the data center to be processing that information, to be storing the data, and a lot of energy is consumed in just idle servers that serve as backup. So electricity consumption happens as these data centers power and process those data sets, store those data sets, and then they generate a lot of heat. And that's where water comes in. So you need water to cool down those data centers. And water is again needed. Very, very fresh potable water is needed. So data centers companies end up using chemicals to treat this water, and it can't really be released back into natural resources without being treated again. And some of this water also evaporates depending on the region that the data center is in. If it's a very hot climate, more water is going to evaporate for cooling if the servers have heated up more, and then the water needs to be replenished. So even if there is a recycled water cycle for data centers, because of the evaporation, your water needs to be regularly replenished. And as we see, like we're seeing rapid progress in the development and adoption of things like generative AI in general, emissions would also go up as more energy is being used. And what we're also seeing is that a lot of data centers depend on fossil fuels, on coal, etc. So then you have associated emissions related to that. So even if companies, big tech companies, talk about trying to meet net zero goals or adopting 100% clean energy within a specific period, we see a lot of companies now falling behind that. So, for example, Microsoft in the last 5 years, their emissions have grown up, and that's directly in correlation to their increase in their data center coverage across the world. So, what does it mean to have these environmental impacts associated with the data center? So, the first point is that not all AI is really equal, right? Not all AI will consume the same kind of energy and or water or have the same amount of carbon emissions. Generative AI, which needs more data, which has millions of parameters for training, and then for deployment also it consumes a lot of energy, definitely consumes more energy than say machine learning or other forms of supervised learning. The other thing is around the kind of task that an AI or AI model does. So, for example, if it's text generation and you're asking for a summary of, say, a couple of paragraphs, it won't need as much computing power as compared to a prompt that requires, say, write a story. Right. So depending on the task at hand, the computing power and therefore the associated energy consumption and water consumption of an AI model would increase. What we're also seeing is that although there are a lot of estimates, you'll see these are approximations around AI perhaps uses this much of water or this much of electricity. And that's because there is a lack of transparency in how companies disclose information about their electricity consumption, right? And it's very hard to pinpoint how much energy or electricity is being consumed by AI in particular within a data center. So you'll know, like, say, if it's a hyperscaler, there'll be e-commerce platforms that are also running out of those data centers. So it's hard to compute how that is, how much AI is consuming without accurate data that companies release. So because there's a lot of self-reporting, there might also be some greenwashing that happens in that context. The other point is around the kind of uncertain futures that we have with AI, like given the rapid stages in which AI are taking over, AI becoming more ubiquitous in how we in our digital lives. So the moment you have, say, AI plugged in, something like a ChatGPT plugged into your Amazon shopping platform or something, and your entire life kind of seems automated at some point, there'll definitely be more AI running, more data centers running, and therefore more energy and water consumption happening. So what's also happening now, that's right now we don't have those estimates. We can't really prepare for that future. So our estimation models for right now don't really also reflect those kind of futures of agentic AI. The other is that there's also a lot of work that's happening just on improving the energy efficiency of these data centers, right? So that's like greening data centers, green AI. But what we've also seen historically is that any efficiency or any savings that happen in, say, energy consumption, that does not necessarily lead to reduced consumption, right? Consumption might plateau, consumption might increase, but consumption might not decrease. And this is the rebound effect, also called the Chivon's paradox. We've also seen in other digital technologies. And then, because this is physical infrastructure, it needs land. And given like fractious histories around land acquisition, who gets displaced for these technology infrastructures, those are also important questions that the rapid progress of data centers brings up. And then those questions around pollution. So noise pollution is a big issue with data centers. We're seeing the data center alley in Virginia in the US. There have been reports of people suffering high blood pressure because data centers have a constant hum, and even if it's not a loud noise, it just disrupts your regular life. So there are issues of noise pollution, air pollution from emissions, and then e-waste from end of life cycle of these data centers, right? Of AI in general. What do you do with, like, say, the data server that served this purpose? What do you do with just the copper wires that are needed for this? So do these lead to like circular economy, or are they how are they being reused? So those are also concerns. And right now you have estimates saying that our capacities to recycle e-waste are far less than the kind of rate and pace at which e-waste is generated. And if you're also interested in kind of understanding how data center activism is kind of shaping up in the rest of the world, there is a very nice article or a report by Rest of World that was published in 2024 on Microsoft's data center in Telangana, and where a petition was filed at the High Court of Telangana, as far as I know. It's not been heard yet, on the pollution and industrial sludge pollution of water that an upcoming data center was causing in Telangana. They were also accused of land encroachment in the area. But then again, this is reflective of, for say, for villagers in a particular area, the need to negotiate with corporations, with state governments, reflecting the kind of power dynamics that are also part of bringing up these infrastructures. I'll now segue into critical minerals as another component of this like human and environmental costs of AI. Critical minerals are essentially, they're a class of minerals. They're usually designated as such by governments. There's no universal list as such of critical minerals. But say, for example, India has identified 30 critical minerals, including lithium, cobalt, nickel, etc., which are integral to development of like economic development primarily. So for say, be it for AI, for other technologies, for renewable energy transitions, these minerals are critical to those developments. And India also just last month launched the National Critical Mineral Mission to kind of go about establishing its sovereignty and oversupply of critical minerals. So you see all these geopolitics also happen around critical minerals. We saw that in the Ukraine-US case, where Ukraine has large reserves of critical minerals right now, which it might not be willing to give away. So there are those geopolitics attached with it as well. And then data centers, renewable energy sources need minerals like copper, lithium. Lithium is used for electric vehicle batteries, cobalt, nickel, etc. So there is definitely a demand for critical minerals in the current technology development trajectories that we have. So then what is the kind of nexus of AI and critical minerals? What are the impacts of this conversation? So one is that there is a kind of not in my backyard politics that kind of happens with critical minerals. So that's essentially saying that because mining and processing, etc., they are intensive in terms of both labor and pollution. So they can lead to sludge being released into water sources, contaminating soil, etc. A lot of countries that have better environmental standards tend to push processing to other developing economies. So, for example, China, which since the 1980s has dominated processing and a lot of critical minerals, is now improving its environmental safeguards and is now pushing processing to less regulated zones like Myanmar, in Myanmar's Kachin state, and where now processing and mining is affecting, processing in particular is affecting food security and livelihoods and biodiversity. And then you also have artisanal mines, which are essentially small scale mines that individuals, that they're not associated with mining companies, but which individuals or groups of people extract minerals from. And of course, they're not as regulated as would be desirable. So there's a lot of health hazards and also reports of forced labor and child labor in artisanal mines. And while a majority of artisanal mines, especially cobalt mines, are in the Democratic Republic of Congo. We also have significant reserves in countries like Indonesia and the Philippines. And environmental pollution, as expected, I won't go into that too much. But then this processing releases a lot of sludge, which can affect surrounding areas. Can also lead to loss of livelihoods for people who might be dependent on nearby water sources or forest produce. And then it impacts their livelihoods. So if you're interested to know more about kind of the nickel mining process in Indonesia, Climate Rights International released a report in 2024, which speaks about the impacts of nickel mining in Indonesia, how it's affected indigenous communities, where they've been displaced from their lands have been taken away without consent, and then the sludge from the mining processes have impacted their waters, and then they had communities that were dependent on lakes for fishing, so those livelihoods get affected because of these processes. So, just to kind of go over the key challenges that we've highlighted in these last few minutes. One is that AI's resource consumption is a dependent on the kind of type of model and tasks you have, but the lack of transparency around these emissions and energy use complicates estimations. AI infrastructures and the processes that enable their development has a lot of negative environmental impacts, and it impacts the communities that live in those areas or work in those mines, etc. And we also seeing these narratives around, like the development of Gen AI. You need more data for better AI, but then what that is leading to is higher resource consumption. You need more energy, more computing power to run these technologies. So then what are some pathways ahead to kind of more equitable and sustainable futures, given just how fraught this AI ecosystem is, and how, like, usually in AI ethics discourse, we don't really go into kind of like the environmental sustainability of things, right? We do focus on important aspects like bias and discrimination arising from AI and kind of like the impacts of AI itself, but then what happens across the AI supply chain. So one aspect is, of course, to kind of take a life cycle approach to AI, right? From the development, from its design process onwards, to the kind of materials that are used for AI, how, for what purpose you're using it, how you're using it, to its the end of its life cycle. How do you dispose of those physical infrastructures? Considering that across, like, impacts across that, be it for researchers, policymakers, that is important. We also need better environmental and social impact assessments of AI, and this kind of ties into this point of having more transparency on how companies reveal data about their electricity and water usage. We're also seeing this movement for small is beautiful, and this relates to this point of, like, minimizing data collection, building smaller models, and building specific purpose models, like not general AI models which can do a range of tasks, but identifying the kind of tasks that you want AI to do, where it's most suitable for, and then building models for that particular purpose. Then you can also collect data as needed, have minimize the data collection process, and then minimize the kind of resources you use for building those models. The other is around just like fostering more interdisciplinary collaborations in this space. You see a lot of people working in their own silos, machine learning scientists, data scientists, and then climate experts, or whatever domain it is, people work in their own silos. So there is a need to kind of exchange that expertise across spaces, get more people working together for better, equitable AI. And then we also need critical AI literacy, to the extent that it's good to kind of know about the impacts of AI for sure, how useful it is, how beneficial it is, what a particular AI can be used, what a particular machine learning intervention can be used for. But then to also understand, okay, these are the kind of other impacts, like more ecosystem related impacts that come with it. This is what's going to happen in the long term. You need kind of what are the kind of resources you need to maintain these infrastructures as well, which is essential for policymakers, for governments as well. And I'm gonna stop here. Just on this note around the most important thing is to assess AI suitability when it comes to solving, be it development challenges, climate challenges, etc. Given these inherent tensions in the use of AI, that first step of carefully spending time to diagnose the problem and then determine AI's suitability before putting it out in the world. And if you're interested in more of our research, we have more of our recommendations and policy at climateai.asia. We also run a media series with a newsletter and a podcast in perhaps more accessible formats that explore contemporary themes in climate and AI. And you can find that at codegreen.asia. I'm going to pause here and catch some breath and also look at the questions. I'm just reading Bahadur Shah's question here, and about I have heard reports of how the AI boom is set to drive a nuclear renaissance. And what are your thoughts on that? And does India's AI strategy have any goals for building energy generation capacity, including renewable sources? There is, we did see in the US at least. Big tech is driving the opening of the 3 Mile Island nuclear reactor plant, which was the site of of a leak a couple of years ago, which then prompted a lot of discomfort in residents near that area and how safe this is. So it's we are definitely seeing narratives even from the IEA saying that big tech, because AI is progressing, it's driving more interest in renewable energy. We're not sure about what that really means, given how even renewable energy needs these other sources, other minerals and metals to for its infrastructure. I'm not sure if India's AI strategy is primarily in the Niti Aayog document on responsible AI. So I'm not really sure if there is definitely an interest for building data centers and associated renewable energy infrastructure with that. So if that answers your question, yeah. Asta, that's a very important question on what citizens can do to use AI more responsibly vis-a-vis climate change. And I think that's something that as individuals we tend to, like you don't want to ask ChatGPT mundane questions because you're too lazy to think through something, right? But then there is a slight problem with that also, uh, where the kind of need to take climate action is placed on the individual, as opposed to, say, corporations that are driving industrialization or are who have some very high emissions. And this is not only for tech or particular, but generally how industrialization, corporate companies have emissions associated with them. We like a lot of conversations is around being mindful of that use, because at the end of the day, there are a lot of incentives to use like generative AI, right? Like you want to generate a summary of something, you don't have enough time. Human beings come with a lot of burdens around time and deadlines, etc. So there is that incentive, which is a very human part of it. So I guess like being mindful of the kind of energy use or water use that comes along with that. Do you really need to use ChatGPT or any generative AI for a particular instance? I guess keeping that in mind is important. It is great, but then to also not forget that climate pollution, climate issues stem from larger systemic issues. All right.
I think Shagun had raised the hand. Shagun, if you have any question, you can unmute and ask the question. Meantime, I was curious about one thing, Donna. What do you think are the particular concerns that are there for India with respect to India's AI boom? Do you see any like particular environment or labor concerns for India in comparison to other countries?
Right. I think for India at least, like research in this space is still picking up. Also because data centers is like a critical infrastructure. It's something that's quite hard to research on, to kind of just gain access to those spaces to research about. The rest of world article and the kind of petition that's happening at Telangana is indicative of particular issues that are in India, and they're kind of similar for Asia, right? Around land, for how land is occupied, for data centers or for these technology infrastructures, and the kind of just fractious economic incentives this kind of brings. So and this is I'm just borrowing an example from someone who was on one of our podcast episodes, where they were talking about the kind of promise of economic growth that technology infrastructures bring. And even in the Telangana case, it says like Microsoft says that there'll be like 180 jobs for locals in the area. But then what are the kind of jobs that are offered, right? It's probably not skilled jobs that are offered to locals. You still have people who are brought in from outside, skilled folks brought in from outside for those jobs, and then you'll have locals probably in operations or some other kind of labor. So that does not really entirely realize that dreams of economic growth for that particular region. And then there are those associated issues like given environmental safeguards and the the kind of enforcement that is around environmental safeguards in different parts of India, just around pollution, be it sludge, etc. So even in Telangana's case, Microsoft was apparently throwing sludge into a nearby lake in that particular village. So there are those issues that perhaps you'll see that there might be similar issues across the globe, and they're just indicative of the kind of power dynamics that corporations, governments have with citizens or with people in particularly marginalized areas.
There's another question from Arsa in the comment. I'll just read it out.
Yeah, I
Along
think.
those. Oh, okay.
Sorry.
Okay.
No, I mean, I can read it out. Along those lines, India AI Mission announced that they've allocated around 50% of their funding to building compute capacity and infrastructure. Realistically, how do you see that going down, since that's still a few years away? I think that's the key, that it's still a few years away. And this kind of goes into that narrative of like the future AI promises, the future promises of AI. And we're also in some sense playing catch up. There is that fear of missing out on technology innovation. So we will of course see a lot of government intervention, just building that base infrastructure for this. That might for sure take a few years, but that's also critical for building like equitable AI. That like you need those data infrastructures, you need that compute capacity for AI that's kind of beneficial for all. And I was listening in on one of the conversations the other day where Nitya Ruff was kind of talking about the cultural value of AI itself, right? So to not miss out on those things, we'll need those infrastructures. How long that'll take is, I have absolutely no idea.
Looks like that's all the questions we have. If you could just give me like, if, do you think there should be like urgent regulations created in this area? And if you think it is required, then maybe like outline anything that comes to the top of your head on like what sort of regulations would be ideal.
Right. I mean, I think regulations are definitely important, but just given the pace at which AI develops and how new technology gets thrown at us quite frequently, regulation ends up playing catch up with AI. Right. It's at some point it might be far behind. Like say, for example, be it the data protection rules. That it took a while for us to come out with the act, and then the rules, and then the implementation enforcement will still take longer. I mean, regulation will definitely help in places like market regulation, around competition, around making sure that particular companies don't have monopolies over the infrastructure, etc. But then perhaps better enforcement of environmental impact assessments, environmental safeguards in these contexts, and being able to make that connection. This is like for grassroots organizations, researchers also working in this space, being able to make those connections, say, between technology infrastructures and the kind of ecosystems they're creating, the kind of marginalizations they will bring about, be it in terms of environment, labor issues. So, for example, like data center policies for most state policies in most state governments mention that they're till like a particular threshold are exempt from labor inspections, right? So and then there are these electricity tax incentives. There's a lot of subsidies that go along with data centers because they're considered essential services, they're considered offering essential services. So just understanding that ecosystem, understanding how it can lead to further marginalization, and then working to with that, be it with legal aid clinics. So for Telangana to have villagers in that area to have gone and filed that case in the High Court of Telangana, that needs a bit of mobilization. It needs a bit of awareness as well. So just being able to kind of in some sense share that awareness with different folks, being able to understand those pain points in the Indian context, because right now a lot of this work is coming from the global north. It's also happening in areas that have systematically seen labor rights violations, environmental rights violations, like South America and Chile, and then even in the US, like now around data center activism. So we definitely need those kind of just more softer aspects. Like in addition to regulations are important for competition, etc. But then just more softer things around critical AI literacy, etc. as well.
Thanks for that. There's one more question. This is again from Asta only. Can go ahead and read it out. Yeah.
We've also recently announced an expression of interest for India AI Safety Institute. What conversations do you feel we need to be having to ensure things go smoothly right from a climate perspective? Right. So this is also an interesting kind of insight into how our conversations on like just AI ethics and the impacts of AI is evolving, right? Like we went from responsible AI to ethical AI, sovereign AI, and we're now talking about AI safety and building up institutes for that. And I think at the last Paris summit there was some kind of cleavage from that as well. But anyway, we should definitely be having more conversations between climate scientists and data scientists, machine learning experts on on these topics of like environmental harms. Where do they come from? Because climate science itself is a very complex space, so it can't be that one single expert is able to kind of cover the vastness of that space. You definitely need a lot of people talking to each other, working with each other, and you do see initiatives like Climate Change AI who are working at this. There was something called the AI plus Planetary Justice Alliance that just started recently. Of course, again, like a lot of this focus is from the global north, so building those collaborations and alliances in the global south in countries like India would be key to kind of also guide these conversations and add some contextual knowledge, localized knowledge to those conversations.
Thank you for that, Donna. I I guess what I have to say is thanks for reminding us that the story of AI is not just about breakthroughs, but also about trade-offs and other sacrifices and informed choices that everybody has to make. With that, I end today's session. I don't want to keep anyone waiting on a Friday night. So, thank you so much for joining. Thank you to all our audiences for tuning into these conversations every day. I hope it inspired each of you to think more critically about the systems that we are building and the ones that we are depending on. So, thank you, everyone, and I hope you have a great weekend. Thank you. Bye.